Welcome everybody to the BevNET and Nosh virtually live event. My name is Brian Zapp from Applied Food Sciences, and I'm the creative director. This is the breakout session on the next generation of energy drinks. And with me, I have Tyler Gage. Hi, Tyler.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
I'll introduce you a little bit further in a few minutes, but excited to have you with us. So, quick background on Applied Food Sciences. We make innovative functional ingredients. We've been around since 2001 when we started as an oncology cancer prevention research company, studying the effects of chlorogenic acids, which are in guayusa, and green coffee and other botanicals on the effects of cancer prevention research. We morphed into food science because it's just so much more exciting of an industry, working with beverages and entrepreneurs like Tyler. And that's really where we got our foothold in the ingredients business. We're what's called vertically integrated, which means that for us, we just have a hand in every piece of the process, from our R&D, where we listen to beverage entrepreneurs, big and small, and get ideas of functionalities and look for ingredients that we're trying to cultivate for those functionalities, and then how to make them water soluble and remove some bitter, fraction from tannins and stuff like that to just improve the flavor profile. We really have an emphasis on responsible sourcing. We go to the farms, we purchase the raw materials ourselves, such that we have a direct line of transparency from seed to your label. And that's really important to us. It's just the end goal is just having complete transparency and traceability. Interesting fact about AFS, I just did some math, and we sold over 6 billion servings of natural and organic caffeine this year. So or through this year. Like I said, with me, I have Tyler Gage. Tyler was the CEO and co-founder of RUNA. And Tyler, it's been a while, I feel like, since BevNET and that audience has seen your face around since the RUNA days. But for nearly a decade, you ran this incredible brand. And what are you doing now? Can you give us a little insight into what your current activity is?
Mountain biking. I just spent a lot of time mountain biking, unfortunately not full work days. Most of my time the last few years since RUNA has been with a company called Terra Fertil. It's a Latin American natural foods company started by some brothers in Ecuador, so not too far from prior experience. They built this very large natural foods company. And I helped them acquire a US brand and then helped them get acquired by Nestle about 1.5 years ago, and still spend a good chunk of time consulting with them and with Nestle on strategy and innovation projects. Also spending some time in the organics waste management space. I'm pretty interested in the world of industrial composting and kicking around some opportunities there. And then I still am the chairman of what was formerly known as RUNA Foundation, which was the nonprofit half of RUNA, which we merged with another community development group and are now calling Aliados, working on innovative supply chains, producer training, and new business ventures with indigenous communities across the Amazon and the Andes. So similar-ish vein of work to RUNA days, but on some new threads.
Fascinating. Yeah, your foothold in the Ecuadorian, Peruvian community is great, and you have definitely set almost a legacy there. So, and including getting us involved in that community as well. So, keep up the great work there. Well, let's dive into it. Energy drinks, right? Surprisingly, seems like they've been around forever, but not that old of a category. Back in the early 80s, it started with a Thai energy drink called Red Bull. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Thai version of the name. Surprisingly, it wasn't even till 15, 16 years later that the next company started jumping on, and Rockstar, Monster, and then shortly thereafter, 5 Hour Energy. But that was the beginning, it was early 2000s that this boom kind of happened, and energy drinks were a thing. Whenever I think about that, it just kind of blows my mind a little bit, because in my life, it feels like they've been around, almost omnipresent forever. Of course, they've changed a lot, from the early 2000s. And then what's interesting is the shelves became overly populated with just extreme energy, as it kind of was. But really in 2011, it was a bit less than a decade before it started declining. Energy drinks kind of tapered off, and shots fell flat, and then kind of concept that RUNA jumped into, which is that maturing millennials needed a more grown-up energy. And millennials have always been the primary driver of energy drink sales. They've, I think Mintel always has it between the ages of 18 to 34 or something like that. But really that gap's broadening as we age. And we all know what it was like when energy drinks came around, and we were maybe at the skate park, and now we're changing diapers and entering boardrooms, right? So to walk in with a loud energy drink doesn't necessarily fit everybody's lifestyle. But the other thing is, it was about safety and trust as well. Some interesting data came out where only 38% of US consumers trust what companies say on their food products, right? So there's this huge lack of trust that's around. And more than a quarter of energy drink consumers drink less energy drinks because they don't trust the ingredients. Are they artificial? Are they bad for my health? So, there's this clear need for something more familiar, more natural, more free from. And that's really where this next phase of energy came from. And I think RUNA very much fits in that category. Is it something that I can see and describe? Is it transparent? Is it, is it more natural? Or is it full of 12 ingredients that I can't read, right? And this, of course, came with this clean label movement as well. So Tyler, when you jumped into RUNA, that's right about this stage in this evolution of energy. How old were you? What were you doing at the time, and how did you stumble upon RUNA and Guayusa rather?
Yeah, so we were 21-ish-year-old college students. It was me and my buddy Dan. And I had become familiar with Guayusa from my time in Latin America. And Dan and I took a business plan class our last semester at school, and were forced to write what was probably going to be a crackpot undergraduate college business plan. So I threw out the idea of trying to develop some sort of a beverage product from Guayusa, and we were all very socially minded, so we thought maybe there was some way we could use the business as a way to create impact for these communities. For us as healthy-ish college students, we saw what we called a class of reluctant Red Bull drinkers, which like you mentioned, are these kind of aging, well, I guess at that point it was more early millennials, but aging millennials who understand that Red Bull might not be the cleanest, healthiest thing to put in their bodies, but it's what's available. So if you're going out at night or going to do something extreme or study for a long time, Red Bull is the go-to, but it's not necessarily something that people look to as fulfilling any deeper health goals. Over the next couple of years, I think it took us a little while to crystallize this idea, but we looked actually what Zico and Vita Coco did in the coconut water space, where they essentially created something that was simple, natural, and functional, coming up against a set of competitors, Gatorade and Powerade, which were super macho branding, very aggressive, were very artificial ingredients, and sort of long lists of ingredients in the nutrition facts. So with coconut water, we said these guys took something that didn't taste anything like a Gatorade, but was one single thing that in and of itself had all the functional benefits for hydration, and they built an explosive category out of coconut water. So with us, we said, rather than just copying a quote natural version of a Red Bull, what if we take something that tastes totally different, that in and of itself has the functional benefits for sustained energy, and then try to use that same logic in the consumer's mind for something that was simple, natural, and functional. So a lot more went into the thought process. Some good thinking, a lot of horrendous thinking, but that was more or less the direction that we
and what you were, so you were a college kid. Obviously, it took some time for this brand to develop. But what year did RUNA get introduced to the U.S. market?
So let's see, we would have started selling loose leaf tea in 2010. Our first energy drinks launched in 2013-ish. And then, yeah, it's been a slow build. We looked a lot to Guayaquil and Samazon as early pioneers of unique ingredients and, very successful brands. And I think we were way, way, way over optimistic about how quickly we could introduce a brand new ingredient. Think about the rise of any of these ingredients, matcha, chia, yerba mate, any of it. It's, usually a multi-decade long process. So, in our head, we were like, oh, 3-4 years, we'll be at 100 million in sales, which was insane pipe dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still fascinating. So from Applied Food Sciences, we supply guayusa, our Amati ingredient is our branded guayusa. So you jumped into energy, and it was we've done the naturalist movement, right? Where it's like free from, more organic, more transparent. And that's great. I think it's a wonderful place, and that still is carrying on. What we're seeing now is from the energy drink market kind of ebb and flowing to suddenly a certain brand category spiking. And in fact, BevNET had just an interesting piece of this in their most recent issue, and they're talking about the emergence of brands like Bang and Rain and C4, Celsius, Life Aid. Keurig Dr. Pepper has a new A-Shoc. And, I mean, just take Bang alone. They went from 345 million last year to 1.1 billion. I mean, we're talking about growth that energy drinks haven't seen since the boom, right? And actually, some have never seen. I think I saw an ad on either Life Aid or Celsius where it was 700% growth for one of their SKUs. So, so I'm starting to look deeper into why this is. And what I've started to realize is that progressively it went from variety and just pure functionality to free from, less than, more natural, clean label, right? To now, what else can you do for me? And part of this is also just the way our society, our culture are going. Millennials, consumers of energy drinks, we're now working at a desk. We're now focusing. We now have so many endless tasks on our plate that we need supplemental support to get everything done.
Yeah.
It's no surprise then that, perceived health benefits are on the rise across products. And perhaps RUNA, being in the naturalist stage, was even still ahead of its time. And that's kind of where I think guayusa kind of enters back into the picture. If you look at some of these brands like the esports gaming community and their Gamer Fuel and G Fuel and stuff like that, they're all touting focus and these other higher level functionalities. Even in Bang and stuff, it's all about adding additional ingredients to maximize the energy performance. Sometimes it's physical, but also a lot of times it's geared towards mental. And more consumers are taking these performance energy drinks and bringing them into the office rather than just the pre-workout space that they may have been originally designed for. All of this really sets an interesting stage for what's next to come. And why I wanted to bring you on is to talk about guayusa and the role that it could play in there. So we've been calling guayusa the next generation of caffeine. And the reason we say that is because it's an interesting makeup, right? So it provides really a bright and focused energy experience that's unlike other caffeine sources. One of the things I tell people that inquire about the ingredient is that the proof is in the pudding. Try it for yourself.
Yeah.
What have been your experiences? Like, you tried this when you were 21 years old amongst some Kichwa community and boiling and steeping in a pot for hours as this guayusa concentrate. What was your first experiences of guayusa? And still to this day, what do you appreciate most about that, the feeling that it provides?
Yeah, I mean, we had to use relatively poetic terminology early on because we didn't have the science or the clinical research to substantiate any of the claims, which I'm excited to hear more about because I know you've been pioneering that front. But one of the ways we described it was almost like a base note. For me, other caffeine sources tend to have a very zippy edge to it. And personally, I was always somewhat caffeine sensitive. And even if I drank a ton of mate when I was in Argentina, or cranked a Red Bull on a rare occasion in college, it would have that edgy, slightly irritated attitude in a way. And something about guayusa, for me and the people we shared it with, it had this more sustained like bass note. It would like keep you elevated. I must say it would like lift you up from behind as opposed to punching you in the face.
Yeah.
And like the more we shared it with people, that's the feedback we got.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because, one of the effects of caffeine is this fight or flight jittery feeling, right? And it just happens that the adrenal medulla is stimulated by the intake of caffeine. So if you're sensitive to caffeine, or if you have too much, you might feel this fight or flight release that happens. Now, this is natural. It's the epinephrine release. And so if you have coffee, tea, or synthetic caffeine, this is a normal effect, right? And sometimes a positive one. You get amped, right? You get jacked up a little bit. And that's your body's same response to the fight or flight hormone of epinephrine. And that's why you might feel anxious, irritable, jittery, nervous, right? That's that same reflex that your body's trying to inhibit, right? And then one thing we discovered with guayusa is that the epinephrine release is much more regulated than other caffeine sources, even in coffee, which has similar properties in caffeine and chlorogenic acids as guayusa. So it's amazing that the results of this study showed significantly lower increases of epinephrine release compared to other caffeine sources. Now all of a sudden we start to piece together these little historic stories too. I remember once when we first were talking, you guys with RUNA were talking about the night watchman, right? With hunting parties going out, caffeinated off guayusa, but yet they were able to stay still and focus. Right? Those are amazing stories, and it's really interesting to see now some biomarkers and demonstrating why that might be, right? Some real science that is correlating these experiences. So what we're trying to do really is just see how it's different than other caffeine sources, right? And so we're looking at the prefrontal cortex and looking at the brain's neurotransmitter function, and especially nootropic benefits. So this enhanced mood, motivation, cognitive performance, stuff like that, right? We noticed that guayusa had elevated effects compared to the control, and all the right areas too: histamine, acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. I know it sounds the same as epinephrine, but different function there. And we saw that guayusa has slight but real indicators of higher effects than caffeine alone. So it's pretty interesting now as you start to look at this neurotransmitter function versus other caffeine sources, and then start to compare them to your original experiences from.
It's incredible. I mean, it makes me so happy to see that you took the time and really dug deep in these layers to be able to show clinically. And I think for us too, part of our mission always was to share guayusa broadly and to get it in more companies' hands, to use it in a whole range of products. And I think we always knew that this research piece would be a linchpin so that the companies could say, oh, cool, there's all these crazy Amazon stories. That's interesting. But if you can actually substantiate it and translate it in the way that you have, it opens so many more doors.
And the next piece for us is actually ongoing. Unfortunately, it's been kind of stinted by this pandemic that we're in. But currently, the University of Memphis Health Studies is doing a cognitive study on gamers. And so, we're looking at this data and we're saying, okay, so you can essentially sit still and focus while the caffeine stimulates your brain, but your body's more at rest. What group, what demographic does this impact the most? And how can we show performance indicators that we can all potentially live by, right? Now, I know the esports community is limited, right? But I also know that based on this caffeine energy drink evolution, that it's not just e-gamers that are using these things. it's you and I who have a lot on our plate and need to focus and jam this out because BevNET Live's tomorrow and I got to have this video up on there, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think this next piece of it is going to be very fascinating. So basically, during esports, e-gaming, especially with something as complex as Fortnite is the game they chose, they're able to study reflexes, how successful your campaigns are. I mean, these are long 6-hour campaigns that are highly caffeinated. You know, what was your memory recall like? What's your motivation like? What, you know, so just beyond the pure data that's driven by the study itself as far as performance and focus, reflexes, stuff like that. Also, just, you know, do you recall more from this game on Guayusa versus other things?
Yeah, I mean, one of the core things they say that Guayusa does is it basically brings you into closer awareness with your dreams. So in the Amazon, the communities will get up at 3, 4 in the morning, sit around the fire, and they'll interpret dreams. So it's a way for them to receive messages and signs. You know, for them, they live in this very folkloric, mythic world, and different encounters, different places, different spirits in a dream will translate very practically for them about whether they should go hunting or fishing, if there's something fortuitous that'll happen or there's some danger. And for them, keeping a very close attunement to the world of their dreams gives them a lot of practical insight. So a little bit different than how we look at it up here, but I do think that there is something to be said about how it might tap into different parts of your brain. Right, and I think just the different levels of sort of neurocognition that can happen, whether it's memory, insight, what we would call intuition, what that actually is. I think there's so much there that we're just beginning to understand from even a neuroscience perspective.
What I see from an ingredient supplier perspective is we get inquiries all the time. Like I said, we sold 5 or 6 billion servings of caffeine, right? So our inquiry inbox is always filled with people with bright ideas around energy. And a lot of them are connecting energy with other nootropics, right? So some of it might be adaptogens and ginseng and stuff like that, ashwagandha. Other things are, you know, L-theanine to try to dampen some of those consequential effects of caffeine intake. And you know, I mean, even early stage Red Bull had basically a glucuronolactone, it was called, a glucarate substrate for basically performance enhancement in energy drinks. And you know, it's just interesting to see all these companies really trying to piece these bits together. And yet Guayusa seems to have this all innately in one plant.
Yeah.
And with a ton of historical experiences around it. And now it's fascinating to see some science, even early stage,
Yeah.
you know, start to uncover these. And we've always believed in Guayusa since we met you, I don't know, 7 years ago or something like that, right? And started to dive into the Guayusa experience with you. But really, it's only been recently that the potential's been almost fully realized, and that we've seen more and more brands start to pick up on the importance of this next level energy, this premium, highly functional energy, and without adding a bunch of ingredients, keeping it very clean and focused. And I know we're a borrowed time now. The last thing I really would love to hear from you on is something you started and is very important to you, and it's just your you know, just the way that Guayusa is cultivated. Mm-hmm. And something that I know that you put your foot down on early and really enforced heavily in, hey, if we're going to make this product a reality, we got to do it in the right way. We got to scale responsibly. We need to look after our communities. And the plant itself kind of throws you some favors in the way it's grown. But can you talk about a little bit how you envision sourcing? And
and first, 2 thoughts on the prior point. One is, I think another recent development is the work your team has done to get it to that gold standard level of FDA approval with the certification. You know, I think that's something that we were at a sufficient level previously, but even as of late, you've been able to get that to a whole nother tier, which can open the door more broadly. The other thing I think about even in the last couple of years with CBD is how that, I think some of the conversation around CBD can lend itself to an understanding of guayusa. Because I think in the CBD world, there's a lot of talk around the whole entourage effect, right? And it seems, to me at least, it's one of the first sort of mass popular conversations around something like an entourage effect, of people really appreciating, hey, plants offer more than just single chemicals. There's a lot more there, some of which we understand, some of which we don't. But when you can string it all together in these sophisticated plants, there's a lot more benefit that can be unleashed. So it's interesting to see that recently develop, and I think that might lend itself to understandings of unique botanicals like guayusa. On the sourcing piece, absolutely, it was really the reason we started the business. And also just a very weird situation we found ourselves in, pretty different than other ingredients like acai or mate or coconut water that were huge supply chains in foreign countries that these great entrepreneurs that we all know bridged and brought to the US. In the case of guayusa, there was no commercial supply chain anywhere in the world, anywhere in the Amazon for this ingredient. So we really got to sculpt from the ground floor commercial production for this could look like. So we decided to work exclusively with indigenous farming families, all grown in agroforestry systems. I think also nowadays the whole regenerative agriculture trend is starting to pick up, and that's 100% what happens in Ecuador. And then really focusing on organic fair trade certification. So, to your point as well, in terms of all guayusa offers, it's not even just the functionality and the flavor, but to have something which with such deep taproots in the sourcing story and how that can be brought forward into brand storytelling. It's one of the things we struggle with RUNA is there was so much to tell. How you organize the pieces can be its own challenge, but it is, I think, unique in the CPG world where there's just so many different things you could talk about. It's just a matter of how and where and when you pull out the different threads.
Yeah, and we've noticed that. I mean, there's plenty of businesses that come to us and they're purely like, show me the science, show me the neurotransmitter function that I can put on my label with your brand and into a supplement for functionality. And then there's others that are more of that farm to table type of story where they want that transparency. I mean, fortunately for all of us, they are both beneficial, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the percentages of people that will pay more for products that align with their values is almost on par with those that will pay more for premium products just because they're organic or well studied. So, either way, it's 40% here, 40% there of rough numbers of market data that shows that people care about this stuff. Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, again, think about the energy drink consumers are actually the largest consumer base in the world right now, the millennial consumer base. And, we're kind of all evolving to a place where we're looking after ourselves, our legacies, and our performance, both in the work environment and outside of it. And also then suddenly a pandemic hits and you start to reflect a little bit more about why and how you're doing things. And now all of a sudden you step back into a product like guayusa and it's almost like the earth gave us this gift where it grows best in chakras, right? So grown amongst other vegetation. And we've actually learned recently even more about this, that the caffeine yields and the yields of the active compounds are higher when grown in this way versus like a monocrop system, right? The leaves even look differently. It's fascinating to see that the environment is incentivizing growth to be done responsibly, right? Yeah. And so, we're grateful that we've had the experiences with you and the RUNA Foundation, all these other pieces and co-ops, because it's really paved the path for the responsible way of growing. And that's something that we've taken very seriously. It's not an easy road at all because to scale it is a challenge. But we have some really, really smart people we're working with that hold true to our visions, which is similar in alignment with yours. And we're excited to see where this ingredient can go. And then also just seeing where the category as a whole goes. this nootropic cognitive function piece of it seems so highly valued these days.
Well, I'm super grateful to you and your team for having had the early vision to dig deeper and, really explore some of the early work that we had done and take it to a whole nother level. And agreed, I feel like it's hopefully just the beginning of a new frontier for Guayusa and it reaching more and more consumers.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like we have some more to talk about down the line too with this more sustainable composting. I'd love to pick your brain on Cascara. It's a big kind of initiative we're doing with coffee cherries. And, coffee beans are all picked by hand, but yet the cherries are almost 80-90% discarded. And it's a terrible waste problem, but it's also a value opportunity where, if we could repurpose those Cascara cherries, which we've found a way to do, it brings tremendous value back to the coffee growing community. Something that's such a highly commoditized product.
Yeah.
And yet literally half the value is just discarded and not realized. So if you could pay for the weight of the beans as a whole, not just the seeds inside, the beans inside, but rather the whole fruit, it just has tremendous opportunity. So we'll get into that down the road, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Tyler, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for spending it with us. And
yeah, it was great to chat with you, and thanks for having me on to riff for a little bit.
Yeah, take care, Tyler. We'll catch you soon.
You all, talk soon.